Anybody else need papers? In case you lost them over the summer. We are on page 117 in chapter 14, about verse 5 or so. But before we get going with that, is there anything else that needs airing out?
Can't believe all the ones and sevens you got up there.
Yeah, lots of 1s and 7s. Yep. Yep. For the 17th.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Were you feeling any older with the 7 out?
Nope. Nope. Nope.
Oh,
Feel-
you just
feel-
wait.
just-
Everything starts.
Oh, I know. Well, no, that started a long time ago already. Yeah. No, that's it's about the same. About the same. About the same. Yeah.
You were in San Diego, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were on the water.
For a couple days at least. Yeah.
I was watching YouTube and they had clips from last week. There were massive dolphins
Yeah.
out there jumping 30
Yeah, oh, yeah.
feet in the air.
Oh yeah. It was crazy.
They had film on them.
Yeah. It was crazy.
I've never known that. Normally they jump like they were going
Yeah.
up, like
Yeah.
whales.
Yeah. They're trying to get away from the killer whales.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I thought they hated. Oh, killer whales.
Killer whales. Orcas.
They always fight sharks.
Yeah, there are. This has been a strange year. They've had a number of killer whales sighted off the coast, which is pretty weird because the water is pretty warm. They don't usually like warm water, and also there's a great white shark nursery, what they call a nursery, off of Torrey Pines, which is a couple miles north by Scripps Institute. And they say about 200 yards offshore, 300 yards offshore, there's kind of a dip in the seafloor and a lot of kelp and stuff like that. And there's a whole bunch of great whites, sharks, and they're having their babies there and raising their babies there. And so, they go out hunting, and the dolphins are right in that same area, and so the great whites or the orcas get too close, and they take off. They jump, try to get away from them as best they can. So yeah.
I mean, seriously, I've never seen them in film or anything jumping straight into the air that high.
Yeah, yeah,
Like twice as high as a boat.
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, they came out of that water like missiles.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's right. You
Get those feet flapping.
Yeah. I went over to the cove. I kayaked over to the cove. It's about a half a mile, and there's a bunch of sea lions there. And the sea lions are just getting more and more territorial about that area. And I was paddling, and a couple of them came right up to the kayak, and just barking and carrying on, and just like, get out of here, I said, yeah, well, I was here long before you were there, you crazy animal.
Well, not really.
Well, no, when I was a kid, I could swim across from the pier to the cove, and there were never any sea lions there, never. Once in a while, you'd get a seal, not a sea lion, but you'd get a seal on the floats. The floats used to be out 100 yards from the beach and tennis club, and so people could swim out there and rest and then swim back. And we'd go out there and we'd sun ourselves out there. It was a big wooden platform anchored to the bottom, and I used to love to go out there. And once in a while, not long, but I'd say a couple times a summer, there would be a seal that would get up on there and decide he wanted it. Well, we didn't. We pushed him right off, because we were there first. They never came. And really, seals never came to the children's pool, never came to the cove, never came to the Wind and Sea Beach, never came to any of those beaches. Seals and sea lions never came there when I was growing up, and up until about 10 years ago, they started showing up. And it was after a big storm. And I think some of them went to the children's pool area for refuge, to stay out of the storm. And they said, hey, this is pretty nice. I think we'll stay. And so they just took it over. And now they're over at the cove, or the sea lions are over at the cove, and they're doing the exact same thing.
Well, look at what they did at Fisherman's Wharf.
Oh, yeah, they took it over, yeah.
You can't get
No,
near.
Monterey, they did the same thing, and Morro Bay, they did the same thing, Santa Barbara. Yeah, they will just take over. And the stupid people, you know, they had their own beaches. They have their own reserves, their own beaches, their own places to go, you know, where they're safe and they're protected and everything else. They don't need to take everything. But the stupid environmental nutcases, you know, I got to give it that back to the, you know, pretty soon you're not going to be able to swim anywhere in California, you know. So, anyway. So, anything about Sunday? Anything else going on you want to talk about? No?
Well, I'm excited we have a new family.
Oh, yeah, well, let's do it. Yeah, military family. Won't be here long, but they'll be here for a couple of years anyway, so that's good. Okay, well, let's just jump back into it then. We are in, as I say, chapter 14. Only have 2 more chapters to go, 15 and 16, so we're kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. And remember that when you're in these chapters, the last chapters of Romans, you're in what's referred to very often as the practical section of Romans. That is, they deal with the problems, the concerns, controversies, whatever, that came up because you had Gentiles, you had pagans who were becoming Christians and bringing with them some of their society norms, some of their ideas and whatever, and conflicting a lot of times with the Jewish believers, people who had come to believe in Jesus as the Messiah, and yet they, of course, they had their background in Judaism, and they had their background in the Old Testament, and of course the Old Testament has a lot of ceremonial laws and a lot of regulations of behavior, not just in worship, or not just in what you would call religious things, but also in what kind of food to eat, and what kind of clothes to wear, and all kinds of other things, what kind of job you could have, and so on and so forth. And so you have this group of Jewish believers, and they're in Rome, and they have a very particular culture. They have a very particular way of looking at things. They have a very particular philosophy of life, if you will, above and beyond their belief in the one true God and the Messiah Jesus, and salvation by grace through faith and that. And then now you have these pagans, former Gentiles, who have come in, and they now believe in Jesus too, but they of course bring a whole different culture. And their culture is not so regulated as to what they eat, or what they drink, what they wear, how specifically to worship, or anything like that. Okay, so there's going to always be a conflict when you've got something like that. We see the same thing, of course, throughout the history of Christianity. When Christianity has come to an area, we always have that same problem. Here in the United States, for example, with the Indian cultures, with the Native American cultures. Okay, you see that up on the reservation, the Apache reservation. When Christianity came there, many Apaches were converted, but they of course had their own traditions, their own customs, and things like that, and so it was very difficult for them to get rid of some of it, because some of it was tied to their idol worship. A real good example would be something referred to as the corn dance. The corn dance in the Apache culture is for girls. When girls turn of age, they begin menstruating, they are then ready to be married off. And the Apaches, and many other tribes too, they have different names for it, but many other tribes too have a ceremony, much like in Hispanic cultures, the quinceañera. The quinceañera is, of course, you get to be 15, and again, that's ready to be married off or whatever. You get to be a young woman, and the quinceañera is a very ornate ceremony that's in the Roman Church. It's not done in other Roman parts of the world. It's not done in Poland. It's not done in Italy, whatever, but it's done in the Hispanic. That is connected very closely to the Mayan and Aztec and Inca and all that, those cultures. And just as the corn dance is with the Apache cultures. Well, so because it is the dance and all the things that surround it are directed to this pagan god, this idol, okay, this false god. Okay, the Christian missionaries, when they found out this, when they saw this, they said, "Oh, you can't do that anymore. You can't have that. You can't have this dance, this corn dance, for these young girls, because it is paying homage to a false god." Well, the Apaches basically then said, "Well, then, what are we going to do? How are these girls then going to get married? How is the guys going to see them as acceptable if we don't sprinkle corn powder on them, corn flour on them, and they don't do this dance and whatever? Then without that ceremony, they're not marriageable or whatever." And so there was a big conflict. Okay, and it still goes on yet today. It still happens today, and in the Roman culture, it still happens in the Hispanic culture. A lot of times, we used to have a Spanish mission in Tucson. We had a Spanish mission in Tucson, in South Tucson, and it was a very good mission. I mean, we had 150, 200 people coming, mostly Hispanics, mostly Mexicans, but the church never had very many actual members. And the reason is because they would go to Bible class, they would come to worship, they would take instruction classes, and then after the instruction classes, they would tell the pastor, "Well, we agree with everything. We think you're right about this and so on. We don't believe in the Pope, and we don't understand about Mary, and we understand about the saints and other things like that. We're not going to do that and everything." And then he'd say, "Good. Well, you can join the church then." And they would say, "No, we can't do that. We can't leave Mother Church, the Mother Church of Mexico. We can't leave the Roman Church. Because if we leave the Roman Church, then we will be ostracized by our relatives. Grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles down in Mexico will never speak to us again." And the Spanish mission that we had, again, the girls would get to be 15, and all their friends would have this very famous, very religious ceremony, and you get a nice new dress, and the boys, you get picked up in a limousine and all this kind of stuff, and you have a very fancy dinner afterwards. I mean, quinceañeras, we have no idea on this side of the border, maybe more so today, but back when I was a kid, people in America had no clue what was going on. But boy, the Hispanics, I mean, this was huge. This was gigantic. And if you didn't have that in your church, or it wasn't part of your church, these poor girls, they lose their friends that they grew up with that were Romans, in the Roman church, and their relatives and their cousins and everything wouldn't speak to them anymore. I mean, it was just horrible. So everywhere we go in the world, we run up against these cultures, and the question always is, what do you do with it? How do you deal with it? One way to deal with it, an unfortunate way to deal with it, is just, cut it all off. Okay, we're not going to do that. And I remember the pastor down in South Tucson, he said, "No, I'm not going to participate in this stuff, this quinceañera business, because I know that's attached to the pagan religion of the indigenous people of Mexico." Myself and some other pastors always took a different view on it and said, "Well, we can have something like that. We can have a ceremony. We can have a prayer. We can have something for when they turn 15. We can call it that, or we can call it whatever we want to call it. We just take out all of the parts that have anything to do with marrying the saints in the Roman Church, or even go back so far as the Aztec and Mayan false gods." And this was a big battle. It This was a real big battle. And it still is in some places yet today. You saw a good example of that in yesterday or Sunday with Sophia Hawkinson and First Communion. Now, as I've pointed out many, many times, and as the paper that I produce, a little sheet that I produce, or mini sheets, the longer one, explains very carefully, is that communion was given to infants and small children for 1,000 years in the Christian church, and it was never questioned until the age of rationalism began, and then it was questioned. And the Romans changed it in 1215, and then when Luther came along, he didn't do a whole lot about it. He just kind of left it to the parishes, he left it to the churches, you do what you want to do. But he didn't condemn anybody who did infant communion or anything like that. Well, so anyway, we have a lot of people coming into our church here, but other churches too, who are from the Roman Church. Okay, they're ex-Catholics, if you will, like that, and they're willing. They'll give up. That the Pope is special, or they'll give up Mary or the saints or whatever, and they're willing to do that. But it's a little hard for some of these other things. It's like some of the parts of baptism that we do that go back again to the apostolic time. There's no reason why Lutherans can't do those things. Can't have candles and can't have salt and oil, and there's no reason they can't do that. But they don't, because they don't want to be, again, they don't want to be connected. They don't want to be thought as being part of the Roman system. And so rather than do something that is going to be comforting or is that going to be meaningful to people and to families, they just cut it all off, which is just kind of crazy. So when people, when I was in El Paso already, and people began to say, my daughter or my son, their cousins or nephews in the Roman Church, they're having their first communion. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that in our church? And I thought it was a valid question. It was a good question. And so I began looking into it, began doing research into it, and of course using the Bible and Lutheran confessions, and I saw no problem with it. I saw no reason not to do that. And when I bring it up to my other pastors friends, my other pastors in the synod, they're shocked. They're shocked and they're scandalized. They're offended. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. And they don't even want to talk about it. They don't even want to discuss it. That's what Paul was facing, that kind of thing. Paul was facing the Jews who they didn't want to discuss, they didn't want to talk about eating meat that had been previously sacrificed to an idol and now was for sale at the butcher shop. They didn't want to talk about it. No, we just cut that off completely. Whether or not that's a good source of food for these new believers or not, we don't want to talk about it. Okay, and we're going to insist in our church. We're going to insist to do things the Old Testament way. We're going to insist. No, you can't eat. You can't have a ham sandwich. We're going to make sure. No, you can't do that. You can't have that pork barbecue, whatever. And they're going to insist on that. And Paul was trying to convince them. Look, you can eat that stuff now. The point of when God told you not to do that, the point of that is no longer applicable. It's no longer valid, all right? Because Jesus has come and fulfilled all the Old Testament ceremonial laws, so you don't have to do those things anymore. That doesn't mean you can go out and murder. That doesn't mean you can steal. That doesn't mean you can lie. Those things are permanent. But the Jews had a really hard time to see the difference between moral law, the law that never changes, and the ceremonial law, or the law of the kind of works where it changes or it becomes fulfilled and gone away with, because of Christ. They had a real hard time deciding between those things. And I think it's the same thing in our world today. Sometimes people have a really hard time differentiating between what's tradition and even it may be a very good tradition or maybe very popular tradition, and what is actually doctrine, what is actually taught in the scriptures, and in our case in the Lutheran confessions. So there's always this tension, there's always this battle between these two things. Well, we've always done it that way, you know. And when I got to my church in Wisconsin, you know, they made up most of their budget every year by having a turkey dinner. Not right at Thanksgiving, but close to a couple weeks before Thanksgiving, kind of a pre-Thanksgiving thing, and they made tons of money over it, you know. And why? Because they sold tickets. They had people pay, you know, for coming to, and there are lots of other churches, both Wisconsin and Missouri, who did the same thing. They had steak fries, they had, you know, brats thing, they had fish fries, they had this, they had all kinds of money-making schemes where they would charge people money and whatever. And I found this to be very strange. I found this to be very odd. You know, you invite people to your church, and then you so that'll be $5, please. You know, but when I first talked to the congregation about my very first year in the ministry, okay, I haven't been there more than 6 months, and of course I get there in July, and now it's getting to November time, and the ladies are all getting ready, you know, and they're going to cook 50 turkeys, you know, or whatever, and I can forget what the price was of the tickets. I think it was $3.50 or so. It wasn't that much, but this was, of course, 40 years ago. But you know, so I went before them and I said, that's just not to be done. You don't charge people. You don't invite people to your church and then charge them money. And they were just like, but we always have, and all the other pastors we've ever had has gone along with it, you know. And I said, well, that's good for them, but they're wrong. Oh, you know, Pastor old Schmittenkopf, he can't possibly be wrong. You know, he baptized me or whatever. No, it's wrong. It's not good stewardship. You don't charge people for coming to an event in your church and then use that to support the gospel ministry of the church. You don't depend upon offerings from unbelievers or non-members to support the work of the church. That's just wrong. The people of the church support them. Well, that might mean a cut in your salary, Pastor, if we don't have this money coming in. And I said, that doesn't matter. I don't care. All right? That's not the point. Okay? And I told him, I said, how would you like it if you went to a church sometime, you know, you had to go to a funeral or a wedding or something, you went into the church and they said, it'll be $5, please, to sit and participate in the funeral. That'll be $5. You wouldn't like that, would you? No, you wouldn't like that at all. But I said, it's the same type of thing. But boy, I tell you, it was like, you know, pulling teeth to get them. And I mean, there were people in the church that didn't speak to me for months because I absolutely forbid it. Now, here's the funny thing. It's a side issue, side story. But here's the funny thing. You know, I said, well, how much do you make on this? And they said, I don't know, $1,000 or $1,200, $1,500. And I said, okay. I said, well, but let's just make that up some other way, or whatever. But I told them, here's what you can do. I said, you can't sell tickets, and you can't charge people. Anybody who wants to come, they can eat if they don't spend a dime, all right? But you can put a hat out, or whatever, or a bucket or something, and say, free will offering. You know, if you want to say thank you for your meal or whatever, or, you know, throw a buck or two in the hat, you know, whatever. And so I put one of my cowboy hats out there, you know, and I said, you know, put your donation in the hat, donations. And you know what happened? They made twice as much money as they ever have in the past. Yeah. Now, you can't say that's going to happen that way every single time. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is you just don't charge. It's like schools, okay? And I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but you just bear with me for a minute. It's like schools. You know, a lot of people in our church body, you know, just think that, you know, day schools are just the greatest thing in the world and just wonderful. And okay, that's fine. Yeah, they can do that. But when they first started, and this was true up until just about, I'd say 25, 30 years ago, very few churches charged tuition, charged money. Because, and you can understand that, because most of the students that went to the day school, the parochial school, were members of the congregation, for the most part. It wasn't really used as an outreach idea. But about 30 years ago, maybe 35 years ago, the Synod started pushing more and more churches to open schools. When Pastor Oftenberg was here, before I got here, the mission board was really pushing hard to start a school. That's why we have that chain link fence out there, by the way. That chain link fence was put in as step one, first step, to make this building a school. Okay? And also the reason we have that big area of rocks out there between the chapel and the parking lot, why isn't the parking lot right up next to the chapel? You ever wonder that? You ever wonder how come you have to walk all that way from the parking lot to the chapel? Because that open area was supposed to be building 2 of the school. I can show you the architect's drawings about this becomes building 1, that becomes building 2. 2 buildings of school and playground for a school and the chapel. The mission board was pushing that very, very hard. Okay? And one of the things that we're telling the churches is this will be great for you because you can charge tuition. And that's totally contrary to scriptural teaching. Why do I say that? Because scriptural teaching is, you know, you don't charge for the gospel. And what's the connection? The connection is we say in all of our literature, in all of our talking about parochial schools, the Synod and Missouri too, for that matter, we always say that the reason that we have these schools is so that every subject can be taught in light of the gospel. Okay, math, history, English, everything is taught in light of the gospel. In other words, you are saying that and you know, we call our teachers ministers of the gospel. That's what we call them. That's their official title. They are ministers of the gospel. All right? And they're trained in a ministerial school. Right? So understand, okay? What goes on in the worship service is what? Gospel proclamation, isn't it? What goes on in the school then is gospel proclamation, isn't it? According to our own literature, that's what we're doing. But in one case, we pass a hat, you know, or pass the plate, or in our case have a box for offerings. We just, that's free will, you don't have to give. But if we have a student come in, especially a non-member student, we charge them for teaching them the gospel. Now again, if you put it in those terms, you are charged a cost, you are charged a price for hearing the free gospel of Jesus Christ. When you put it that way, everybody, almost everybody I know and everybody I've ever talked to will say, oh, that's terrible. But then when a school starts at a church and the subject of tuition comes up, oh, well, we got to charge a lot of tuition so we can pay our teachers and everything. That's very inconsistent, isn't it? Okay? But again, that has now become tradition. That's become tradition. Okay? So now whenever the mission board or somebody else comes along and says, hey, you need to start a school at this church, the pastors are co-opted. You know, they're basically pressured into adding tuition as part of the program, okay? Even though they shouldn't do that. And I've talked to a lot of pastors with schools over the years, and they all agree with me. Yes, that we should not charge tuition. We should leave that up, again, free will offering. If they want to pay, fine. If they don't, that's okay. And we should just consider it a privilege to teach their children the gospel in English class or math class or whatever it is, okay? But you talk to the lay people, of course, who are in charge of the budget, you know, and who are having to pay the bills, keep the lights on. Oh, I got to do that. So again, folks, what Paul is talking about in these last couple chapters is very important. The principles that he's outlining, the individual topics, the particular subjects like meat to idols and stuff like that, that may not apply anymore, but the principles still apply. And the principle is that you don't do anything that is going to compromise the gospel on the one hand, but on the other hand, you can do all kinds of things that you may think, well, I don't know if that's okay, but it doesn't. You ask the question, does it compromise the gospel? And if it doesn't, you can do them. When Sophia gets to be 15, I'll be happy to do a quinceañera for her because it does not compromise the gospel. All right? That way she's not going to be all wacky and different than all of her cousins. All right, in the Roman church. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just like there's nothing wrong with icons, just like there's nothing wrong with putting ashes on your head. Just like none of those things compromise the gospel. The reason you don't see that in many Lutheran churches is because they're like the old Jews in Rome. They're not able sometimes to differentiate between what is doctrine and principle and what is application. What is ceremonial and what is moral. Even my peers in the ministry sometimes just don't have, for whatever reason, they just cannot sometimes see the difference between these things. So that's why this chapter is important. So let's read a little bit, and then we'll go back to the notes. So we're going to start at verse 5 and read down to verse 9 at least. One person regards one day above another, another regards every day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. Okay, so right there, Paul is saying there's no difference between the days of the week. And right there again, the Jews would complain because, whoa, wait a minute, we rest on the Sabbath day, the Saturday, seventh day, that's holy, that's special. Well, no, it was special. It was a part of the ceremonial law. It's not special anymore. It says right here, okay? He who observes the day observes it for the Lord. And he who eats does so for the Lord. For he who gives thanks to God. And he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat and gives thanks to God. So you want to eat this, and he's talking about eating, again, this meat that is one sacrificed to idols. So somebody brought a sacrifice, brought a lamb to Zeus, all right? And the lamb was killed, and its blood scattered or whatever, and its heart taken out and burned in fire or whatever, all that. And then the meat, the lamb was skinned, and then the meat was put over here in the counter, and for sale, lamb chops, special today, That's what they did. That's what they did. The temple, or the priests of Zeus, would sell the meat, to make money for themselves. And they probably would keep some to eat, yeah, but they would sell it. And so you could go to the marketplace, and there were temples, of course, all around where the marketplace was, and you could go to the marketplace and you could find just about any kind of animal that had been sacrificed to some false god, and there the meat was butchered, and they're available for you to buy. So you could take home and feed your family. And this was normal. Everybody did this. It was not a big thing. But of course the Jews, no, you can't do that. You can't do that because that meat was dedicated to a false god. And look what Paul's saying here. He says if he eats, whether he eats or eats not, he does so for the Lord. So if you go and you buy the meat that was sacrificed to a non-existent god, okay, you go home and you pray over it, and you say, thank you, Jesus, for this food, you have sanctified the food, right? Of course you have. And you're giving thanks to God for people being stupid enough to sacrifice a nice lamb to Zeus. If they're stupid enough to do that, and you can take advantage of it by buying it and having it for your family, it's all good to you. Thank you, Lord. Appreciate that. That's what he's saying there. Thank you, God, for allowing me to have this wonderful food. And then he says, but on the other hand, somebody says, nah, I wouldn't feel right eating the lamb sacrificed to Zeus. And Paul says, good for you. That's fine too. That's fine too. And why don't you feel right? Well, because it's a false god that's kind of a slap in the face of the true God. Okay, that's a good thought. So good for you. You see? Okay? The ceremonial part of the law is abrogated. And so you have to ask, is it a moral part of the law? It is an unchangeable part of the law, God's unchangeable will, what meat you eat. No. It's not in the Ten Commandments. Okay? It's not in the Ten Commandments. Now, if you think, well, my conscience won't let me to do that because I don't want to give my money to the priests of Zeus. Okay? If somebody says to me, I cannot eat at, pick one. Let's say McDonald's all of a sudden decides they're going to give 10% of their profits to the Buddhist church. Okay, just for example. Okay, and then I'm out with somebody and I'll say, hey, let's stop by McDonald's because I can't eat at McDonald's anymore. Why? Because 10% of wherever I go goes to the Buddhist church, goes to the Buddhist temple. And I don't think that's right. I wouldn't feel right. I don't laugh at them. I don't tell them, oh, that's stupid. No. Okay? I say here, if he eats not, he gives thanks to God. In other words, if he doesn't want to eat and he doesn't want to give that money to the priests of Zeus or to McDonald's, who's going to give 10% of it to the Buddhist temple, that's fine. That he's following his conscience. That's good enough for me. Now, if he says, you can't eat there too, that's wrong. That's wrong. Or if he goes back to church and he says, Pastor, we need to put something in our bylaws, in our Constitution that says no member of this church can ever eat at McDonald's again as long as they live. And if they do, they get excommunicated. That's wrong. That's wrong. Now, does this mean we just do whatever is good and right in our own eyes? No, there's still the moral law. Okay? But when it comes to things that are not moral law, we call those things adiaphora. Okay? They're neither commanded nor forbidden. Nowhere does God say, where you can eat, what you can eat, how you can eat, what time you can eat. That's just not in God's moral law. Right? Neither is in God's moral law who you do business with. If you don't want to do business with, let's say, a taco truck, and the taco truck is run by 2 lesbian girls, all right, and you don't want to do business with them because they're gay, that's fine. But don't tell me I can't do business with them, because there's nothing in God's word that says you can't do business with an unbeliever. If that were true, folks, we'd be in a world of hurt. Okay? We'd be like the Amish, wouldn't we? We would be in little colonies, right, like the Amish, and we would only do business with each other, and we'd only talk to each other, we'd only deal with each other, and we'd be a little, and then of course, how are we going to share the gospel then? How much evangelism do the Amish do? 0. Okay? Their growth is all internal. Okay? They just have a lot of kids. Well, okay, that's one way to do it, I guess. But is that making disciples of all nations? No, it's not. Okay? So God doesn't tell us you can't do business with that car dealer because he's Muslim. God doesn't say that. God doesn't tell us you can't do business with that grocery store because it's run by Mormons. Okay? Safeway and Albertsons and Company is controlled 60-70% by Mormons. Okay? If you buy a bottle of booze anywhere in the West, that money is going to the Mormon church. I guarantee you. Because the Mormons own most of the liquor distributor licenses in the western states. They may not drink booze themselves, but boy, they make a lot of money off of it. John McCain's wife, John McCain's wife, the second one anyway, when he married, when he was dead, when he died, or was married to her when he died, she comes from the biggest liquor distributor owner in Arizona, and they are a Mormon family. Okay? And the same is true in Utah, in New Mexico, in Nevada, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. I don't know about California, but I know all of those mountain states, the Mormons own the biggest liquor distributorships. So when you go to Safeway and you buy a bottle of brandy, part of that profit's going to go to the CEOs of Albertsons and Safeway, and they're going to tithe to the Mormon church. So if you all of a sudden decide, I can't support the Mormon church anymore, I'm not going to shop at Safeways, okay, fine. Well, then you're going to shop at Fry's. Well, what happens when Fry's merge? You're going to be out of luck, right? Well, you got to go to Food City, I guess. I don't know. But then you got to ask, well, where does their money go? Maybe their money goes, maybe they tithe to the Roman church, right? Or maybe they're unbelievers, right? Are you going to go to the Toyota dealership here in town and I want to talk to whoever bought it from Ellie, I forget what their name was, but I'm going to, I knew Ellie McPherson or whatever her name was. I knew her pretty well. She was a nice lady. But I don't know what her religion was. I have no idea what her religion was. I don't know where she went to church. Okay? But if you're going to go down, if you're going to go down there and say, I want to talk to the owner, and you walk into the owner's office and say, what church do you go to? He says, what business is that of yours? Well, I got to know, otherwise I can't buy cars from you. You got to be a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran. Good luck. You have to drive all the way to Wisconsin to get a car. Go see Ernie von Schledorn. Well, he was in Wells anyway, but you know what I mean. Okay? See what we're talking about here, folks? And a lot of people get all balled up in this stuff. They all get, oh, well, I can't do that because that's going to be supporting, homosexual agenda, or that's going to be supporting the Rainbow Coalition, or that's going to be supporting this, and okay, fine. If you want to do that yourself, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well,
okay?
What a stressful life that.
Well, yes, it would be. The problem comes, like what happened in Rome, the problem comes when the majority of the church, who were mostly Jews, all of a sudden wanted to make rules for everybody and say, no, you got to live exactly the way we live. And you got to wear your clothes the way we wear them, and you got to eat what we eat, and you got to eat when we eat, and your holy day has got to be the same as our holy day, and yada, yada, yada. That's what he's dealing with here, and that's why he says what he says. If you eat and you give thanks to God, you're good. If you don't eat and you still give thanks to God, you're good. So what's the issue? Is the eating the issue? No. What's the issue? The issue is, of course, where are you in your relationship to God? If you're thankful to God for the lamb sacrificed to Zeus, fine. And if you're thankful to God that you're eating beans because you can't eat the lamb sacrificed to Zeus, you still thank God. Okay? Keep going. For not one of us lives for himself, and not one of us dies for himself. For if we live, notice, for the Lord. Or if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or we die, we are the Lord's. So again, the moral law, the holy, unchangeable will of God. You shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery. Make God number one in your life, etc., etc. Believe and treasure God's word. Worship God regularly. Those things. That stays the same. Anything else? You don't worry about it. To this end, Christ died and lived again, that he might be both Lord, both of the dead and the living. The dead, of course, are not dead, really. Are they?
No.
No. Even those in hell are alive. Their souls are alive. They're cut off from God, but they're alive. Their souls are still existing. Okay? Those who have died before us and are in heaven, they're alive. Their souls are alive. Okay? And we know, of course, Jesus is alive, body and soul. And Elijah is alive, body and soul. And Enoch is alive, body and soul. And maybe Moses is alive, body and soul. Who knows? Maybe there's others too that just aren't recorded in Scripture. We don't know. But so when Paul says Lord of the dead and the living, he's really saying Lord of all, isn't he? He's really saying Lord of everybody. Okay? And that's true. God is God of the unbelievers too. Now, of course, the unbelievers won't get any benefit out of that in eternity, but still, he is still their God. And that's what we mean. All the people are children of God. That's true. That's a true statement. Okay? There are children small c and there are children big C. Small c children are everybody. Every human being is a child of God. That's true. And then big C, believers like us, we are children of God in an eternal sense. Okay? That's the difference. Let's look at the notes. Number 18. From the matter of food, Paul proceeds to the observance of certain days. We can fairly assume that the reference is particularly to Sabbath. Some commentators include most or all the Jewish festivals that were prescribed in the Old Testament. However, once again, it is the general principle that applies here, regardless of what day or festival is being considered. For example, there's nothing wrong in New Testament believers observing the Day of Atonement, or Passover, or the Feast of Tabernacles, among others, as long as it is not done in a way that would bring others under some kind of judgment. So when we have Passover here, I make it very, very clear. You want to come to Passover? Good for you. You're welcome. We'll have a good time. It's great. You don't want to come to Passover? Fine. No judgment. Coming to Passover is different than going to a regular worship service. Everybody's welcome to a regular worship service, and if you don't go to a regular worship service, at least not regularly, okay, then there's something wrong with your faith. If you don't come to Passover ever, there's nothing wrong with your faith necessarily. Now, I had the problem the first year we had Passover here, 30 some odd years ago, or about 30 years ago. First time I did Passover here, yeah, I had a bunch of members, good, fine people, all dead now, but fine people would come up to me and say, well, I'm not going to no Jewish thing. What are we doing a Jewish thing here for? And I said, well, yeah, okay, it's Jewish from that sense, but it's Old Testament, okay, and we can do Old Testament stuff, all right, and we can do it in a New Testament way. We can update it and make it New Testament. Yeah. I will never, ever be there. This is wrong. And that particular person never once came. Never once came. Dead and buried. Did a funeral for him. They're gone. Okay, but never once came on Monday, Thursday for Passover. I didn't hold it against her. I didn't say, oh, you're a creep, you're a cretin. I don't want nothing to do with you. I'm going to throw you out of my church. No. Hey, that was the way she was raised in a town where she did, that was just the way they were. Well, the Jews kept to themselves and they kept to themselves, and that's just the way it was. Okay, fine. And the same thing with a bunch of other stuff. It's the same thing. Like when I went to every Sunday communion, same thing. Went to every Sunday communion. I have all kinds of people come up to me and say, Pastor, I'm not coming every Sunday. I just can't do that. Twice a month is plenty for me. Fine. Okay. I didn't hold it against him. I didn't tell him you had to. I didn't say I'm going to throw you out. I'm going to be mean to you. Now, in that case, almost every single one of them turned around the other way. And when they moved, a couple of them moved to different churches, they were quite obnoxious in those churches. I got phone calls from their new pastor saying, hey, what in the world are you doing out there? You got this person all wrapped up in every Sunday communion and they won't let it go. Bring it up at every meeting. It's not my fault. That's your fault. You ought to take it up and discuss it. Well, I can't discuss it. No. People will go up. It's too Roman. It's not Rome. It's not Rome. But there again, differentiate, okay? What is Jesus' command? Jesus' command is do this in remembrance of me. That's his command. Now, I think when he says often, that's whenever we worship. Okay? At least on Sundays. Other people think often means once or twice a year. I think that's a pretty big stretch. I think it's a pretty big stretch to say, that you take communion. Jesus says, "Do this often in remembrance of me." That means once or twice a year.
Otherwise, he would have said semi.
I have a little hard time with that argument. But you want to say once a month? Okay, you want to say once a month? Fine, you say once a month. I'm not going to excommunicate you. Okay? Then come once a month. But why should I penalize the people who want every Sunday by only offering it every Sunday, on once a month? See? Again, differentiate, okay, between principle, moral principle, doctrinal principle, biblical principle, and options, choices that you can take or leave. That's what we're talking about. Number 20, from the book of Acts, we know that the early church soon began to put greater emphasis on the first day of the week, Sunday, to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ than on the seventh day, which was the Old Testament Sabbath. And the people that did this, folks, were all Jews. The apostles were all Jews. But they began to worship on Sunday. Don't believe this nonsense from the Seventh-day Adventists and other groups who tell you that this was a proclamation of the Pope or of the Emperor of Rome, in 300 A.D. or 325 or whatever. Don't believe that. That's Seventh-day Adventists try to sell that all the time. They're forever saying that. That's that's just plain old bunk. That's not true. 300 years after the apostles was not when Sunday became Sunday. Sunday became Sunday when the apostles were still alive. And the book of Acts is very clear on that. And, these Seventh-day Adventists, they just take off and run with this, and people don't know their Bibles well enough to put them in their place. It's really sad. There's absolutely no biblical basis for the tendency that developed in the church over the centuries to apply the stringent regulations that govern the Sabbath to Sunday. Sabbatarians, that's what they're called. Sabbatarians take Sunday and they make it the New Testament Sabbath. There's nothing in the Bible, nothing that the apostles said, nothing that Jesus said, that makes Sunday the New Testament Sabbath. There is not a Sabbath anymore, except a spiritual Sabbath. There is no Sabbath day anymore. It has been abrogated. It has been totally removed. Now, if you want to go to church on Saturday, fine. For a couple years in Benson, when I was doing Benson, we had to move church to Saturday because the church here I was doing Bible class and I didn't have anybody to take over for me, and so I asked them, I said, can we meet on Saturday mornings instead of Sunday mornings? And they said, fine. They had no problem with that. Matter of fact, some of them kind of liked it that way. And so we chose to make Saturday our Sunday, our Sunday worship. We can do that. I told them, I said, I can move it to Tuesday, I can move it to Wednesday, I can move it to Friday. We can put it wherever we want to. Same thing here. If it would work better for everybody, if the entire congregation, if the big plant moved in here, let's say, building wickets or whatever, and at the wicket plant, they had a Sunday, they had a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour schedule or whatever, and 9/10 of the congregation, had the schedule where they were working at the wicket factory on Sunday morning, fine. We'll move our church service to Monday morning, or we'll move our church service to some other place, or Saturday afternoon, or Wednesday night, or whatever. Not a problem, folks. Okay? And the same with selling cars or booze or anything else. All these laws around the country, not so much anymore, but used to be years ago, there's a lot of blue laws, okay, or Sunday laws. You go into a town, nothing was open. Now, would I prefer that all the stores be closed on Sunday? Sure. Would I prefer that there be no soccer games or baseball games or whatever on Sunday mornings? Sure, I would. I would prefer that as a pastor. Because then people wouldn't have a choice. They have no place else to go, might as well go to church. And that's the way it was when I started in the ministry. When I started in the ministry, the little town where I was a pastor was absolutely, I mean, the sidewalks were rolled up, literally. I mean, nothing was open. Nothing. Absolutely. You couldn't buy a thing in town. And the grocery stores, you couldn't go to the grocery store. You couldn't, nothing. And so, people did. People went to church because, nothing else to do. When I got to El Paso, I got to Texas, when I was first there in the 80s, it was always funny to go to the grocery stores. The grocery stores didn't open until 10 or 11. Maybe it was noon. No, it was 10. Those grocery stores didn't open until 10. And then, but when you went at 10, if you went at 10 on Sundays, and of course I never did, but people told me, and you walked in, they always had the liquor section gated off. And you couldn't buy any booze, beer, wine, whatever. You couldn't buy any booze before 11. Before, was it 11 or 12? I forget, it was one of those. And so even though the store was open, you still couldn't buy booze on Sundays. Now that's not true anymore, but it was. And so there are all kinds of these laws. And in Sierra Vista, I don't know that it's a law, but I notice that the car dealers are shut down on Sundays. I don't know if that's a rule. I know in some towns, like in Yuma, it's a rule. It's a law. You can't sell cars on Sunday, or the car dealer. Or no, the law is in Yuma. As I remember, the owners, one of the companies, telling me, you have to pick a day. You can't be open 7 days in a row. You have to be open only 6 days in a row. You have to give your employees 1 day off. And so most of the car dealers in Yuma shut down on Sundays. There were a few that shut down on Mondays, but most of them did it on Sundays. I don't know if it's a rule here or if it's just that's something they decided to do. Anyway, so that's the idea. These blue laws are totally unbiblical. They were installed by mostly the Baptist, Methodist type churches that ruled a lot of these Midwestern towns. And because of what they were Sabbatarians. They were trying to make Sunday the new Sabbath and impose the same kind of regulations on Sunday that the Old Testament people had on Saturday. That's what they're doing. Apart from the principle that the body needs time off and that 6-day work week followed by a day of rest is a healthy one, keeping the Sabbath rest on Sunday is not a biblical requirement for believers in Christ. 5 more minutes. Number 22. Verse 7 is a great reminder. Putting all the related issues together, Paul states emphatically, we're not alone in this world. Each of us have an effect on others. Or as the poet put it, no man is an island alone unto himself. I'm sure you're familiar with that poem. I just thought I'd throw it in there for fun. 23, the common ground of our human relationships is the relationship we have with Christ. What binds us together as members of the same body is that we are all connected to the head. Even in disputable matters, it is not our private opinions or preferences that count, but our relationship to Jesus Christ. Even our private opinions must be surrendered to His authority. So when Jesus speaks, then that's the final word. If Jesus doesn't speak, then we shouldn't either. We can speak to ourselves, but we don't want to judge somebody else. We especially don't want to make somebody feel as though they are less of a Christian or less of a believer because they don't do what we do. Okay? That's what's important. We are not all alone. We have an effect on people, and if we judge people and we tell them, "Whoa, boy, I can't believe you're giving, your money to the, you're buying your liquor from a Mormon distributorship," ooh, okay, then you're acting as though you're, what you do doesn't affect anybody else. Like you can just do that to them and it's not going to hurt them. Well, of course it's going to hurt them. It's going to inflame their consciences to think they're doing something wrong. They're probably not going to stop. And so they're going to be doing stuff wrong that they're thinking all the time, and that's going to torture them. Okay? So, yeah, think about it, folks. It's Paul's mention of our death that gives us depth to the statement. The way we look at death will determine how we handle life. If we keep in mind that our life on earth covers only a limited period of our existence and that we spend the bulk of it in eternity, we learn how to judge our days and minutes in the light of eternity. Does this matter for eternity? There's a lot of things that matter for eternity, of course, in the Bible. Outside of that, there are not a lot of things, well, there's really nothing outside of the Bible that is going to last for eternity. I, for one, in my now official old age, I, for one, am sick and tired of hearing that every election is the most important election of all time. I've said this to you guys before, I'll say it again. That's bunk. That's BS. All right? It's just not true. Yeah, I think it's important to vote. Sure. Go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. And you want to try and persuade your neighbor? Fine. Fine. You want to join a party? You want to work for that party? You want to go out and knock on doors? You want to hand out leaflets? Fine. Go ahead and do that. That's wonderful. That's great. I don't condemn. If you don't want to do that, if you want nothing to do with that, or if you just want to rip up your ballot you get in the mail and throw it away, that's okay too. There's no law in the United States of America that says you have to vote. No law.
The only time you have to vote is when you're dead.
No, that's when you get to vote.
Oh, yeah.
In Russia, it's a law. You got to vote. If you don't vote, they'll throw you in jail. Okay? There's a bunch of other countries around the world. Well, that's true. You don't vote, they'll throw you in jail. You do not have the freedom not to vote. Okay? But ask yourself the question, is this going to impact eternity? I can guarantee you it's not. I can guarantee you it's not. I don't care if the next president of the United States becomes the biggest persecutor of Christianity in the history of the world. I don't care if the next president of the United States is right up there with the Pope as the Antichrist. I can guarantee you that his effects are not going to be eternal. They're not. Jesus is going to put an end to the world, and that's going to be the end of that. And we've seen what persecutions do to the church. Persecutions actually very often benefit the church. We should not be afraid of persecutions. If nothing else, persecutions sure do one thing, and that is they purify the church. Because if you get your head cut off by being a believer, how many people are going to, show up and be a believer if they're not? How many people are going to come to Sunday worship if somebody out standing here on the sidewalk taking down names and going to put you in prison for showing up? How many people are going to show up? I may grouse and complain once in a while about 30 or 40 people being in church, but if that ever happens, I'll be happy to see 5 or 6. Okay? So persecutions, at least they do that. If they don't do anything else, then we know they do other things, but if they don't do anything else, they sure purify their church. You sure find out real quick who are the believers and who are the hypocrites. That's for sure. So you want to make a decision when you vote, you always want to make a decision based upon the practical stuff, the economy, border, whatever, taxes. Fine. Don't make your decision based upon who's on God's side. Okay? Don't do that. Don't do that. That God makes it work out the way He wants to work out. And we can't figure it out sometimes. I don't know why He allowed Jimmy Carter to be president. I have no clue. But He did. Go figure. But hey,
Gerald Ford's another one.
Well, yeah, or FDR for that matter. Okay, I don't understand that. I'm not meant to understand that. I'll understand that maybe when I get to heaven. Right? Okay, well, enough. We need to cut it off. So we'll pick it up at 25, top of the page 119, and verse 10.
Pastor, are we resuming Saturday,
Yes,
the 28th at 1 p.m.?
1 p.m., yes. 1 p.m. Saturday, 1 p.m. And those are the blue sheets. And we're still in the Sermon on the Mount. But anyway, this is good stuff. So let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.